Alright, yeah! Welcome to this gimmick episode of Control City Freak. Today we are going to talk about the worst control city in each state. Alright, let me tell you about the rules of what I'm looking at here. I'm trying to find overhead or bottom line cities only, so not just random interchanges. You're not going to see any East St. Louis on here. In-state cities are preferred, but out-of-state cities will be considered too. And I am only looking at interstates here. I am not looking at anything below Interstate Highway. And the more major the interstate is, the more harsh I judge its control cities. So we're especially looking at two-digit interstates, and when possible, we are looking at XO and X5 interstates, the biggest of the big. This is not necessarily the smallest control city in each state, it's just the most useless and egregious one for long-distance traffic. So we're not talking local traffic here. I'm a big believer that control cities really are there for long-distance traffic on interstate highways, so that is what we are looking for here. All right, let's start out in Alabama. They once had a beautiful Mississippi, Florida sign here. Then they changed it to Pensacola, Pascagoula. Yeah, I'm sure that doesn't cause any confusion whatsoever when you have two 4-syllable cities that start with P and end with La. Great idea. And obviously Pascagoula is the control city we're going with here. Pascagoula should never be signed on an overhead unless it's for the exit for it. Alaska, all these are kind of bad. So Alaska, it's hard to find any overhead signs anyway, so I'll go with this. Fort Wainwright, honestly, you could go to Fort Wainwright in either direction here, so it's kind of a weird thing to see. If you go north, it is a 5-minute shorter drive, but that's all it's saving you is 5 minutes. Delta Junction, North Pole, neither one of those are great, but it's hard to figure out what to do in Alaska. Arizona is so good at this that their worst one, I gotta include something, is signing East 10 for nothing here at the interchange with I-17. And even in that case, I can understand it. You don't want to sign it for Tucson because you would have already come from 10, because this is the second time you meet 10 in this loop. I would say the only adjustment I would make, I would sign it East 10 for downtown Phoenix. Arkansas, I don't know what they're doing here. This one-off random sign, I think this is the only one. We get Marion, I don't even know what that is, and West Memphis over Memphis. Everywhere else, I think they mostly sign Memphis, but signing West Memphis on an overhead sign here is absolutely insane. 5, in California, signing Santa Ana, I think is some of the worst signage anywhere in the country. I think it's a terrible choice, and I think it's especially bad northbound, because northbound in San Diego, you're signed for Los Angeles, and then for about 10 or 15 miles of Orange County, it switches to Santa Ana, and then you go back to Los Angeles. Doesn't make any sense. Should just be LA the whole way. It's the second biggest city in America, and it's 2 hours from San Diego. No reason to switch it up. Southbound, it should be San Diego the whole way as well, but southbound, it has a little bit more of a leg to stand on. You're watching Control City Freak. This is the YouTube channel where we talk about highways and the places that they're signed to go to. If you dig this kind of content, why not give us a like? And if you really like it, why not subscribe? Yeah, subscribe. Alright, Connecticut, I'm sure you could have guessed this one. It is New London. New London, it's not that small of a town, but it's just there's other stuff that'd be better to be signed. Providence at that point, I think, is probably what should be signed. Delaware does a pretty good job, so I couldn't find a standalone overhead sign in Delaware with a bad control city, because we only have like 30 miles or less of I-95 on it. So I gotta go with signing Chester. They do sign Philly as well, and normally I don't mind dual sign controls as long as the main bottom one is good. But adding Chester there is just something they don't need to do. Florida has a lot of weird ones, Ocala and Naples and all that, but Lake City takes the cake for being the worst one. I know it's the Interstate Junction, but there's nothing there in Lake City. It's a tiny town. And signing a major road, I-10, one of the biggest roads in the country, the king of the South, going all the way to Los Angeles, Santa Monica. It's very beginning in Jacksonville to insult this great road by slapping that Lake City on there. It is bad. Georgia, it was hard to find a standalone sign that didn't work here, so I went with this 95 South Brunswick and Jacksonville coming south of Savannah, adding that Brunswick on there. But again, usually I don't mind when they do that, but in this case we also get a mileage sign for Brunswick only, no Jacksonville on that mileage sign. So silly to have a one city mileage sign posted and acting like you really are treating Brunswick as the primary over Jacksonville. That's bad signage there. Hawaii, I've never been. I'm by no means an expert, but I will say here in eastern Honolulu, signing H1 west for Waianae is not good because you're kind of jumping the gun here. I think at this point you should be signing downtown Honolulu or possibly the airport, because that would be helpful for tourists. There's a lot of tourists on the island. Then sign Waianae once you're past the airport. Idaho, this 84 west of Nampa and Ontario, neither of those are very good. Nampa being a more or less a suburb of Boise. Again, 2 city signs is usually I'm forgiving on that, but Ontario as your second major one is insane. If you're gonna sign a city in Oregon, sign Portland. Why would you sign Ontario? First city over there, first city over the line, and it's, not very much there. Illinois has a lot of really hilarious bad ones to pick from. There are a lot of overheads for like Joliet over Chicago and East St. Louis and Jacksonville, Illinois, stuff like that. But definitely the worst is going to be 88 signed for Sterling and Rock Falls. That is ridiculous. It's because that's where the toll-free section ends, I guess, is why they're signing that. But it is insane to sign that over signing Chicago or at least Aurora, to sign these 2 small towns. DeKalb would be better than signing Sterling and Rock Falls. Indiana does a pretty bang-up job all around. 465, not having control cities would probably be my biggest beef, but that is in flux right now as they are working on I-69 there. So I'm avoiding 465, and I am just talking about current roads. And this sign on the turnpike for I-69, having a non-overhead sign and also having Angola be the first thing on the list. This was the Angola interchange before I-69 existed, so it was fine to have Angola on it there, but Angola is pretty small. In Iowa, this is definitely Iowa's biggest unforced error. I don't know why they insist on doing this, all this Council Bluffs signing, when Omaha is right over the river. Omaha is much more famous, much bigger. It is what should be signed, not Council Bluffs. Kansas was a little hard to pick. That one sign, 135, and I-35 meet in south of Wichita, where 135 is signed for South Wichita instead of Wichita, is not great, where 35 is signed for Wichita because they're trying to get one more toll out of you. Anywhere you're going in Wichita, you're better off getting on 135. For overall control cities, I would say Hays is probably the least useful control city in the state of Kansas that shows up on an overhead sign. Here in Salina, they probably could just switch right to Denver. In Kentucky, Winchester, well, that's a secondary, so I'm not worried about that, but Ashland as a primary is a ridiculous choice. 64 does not come particularly close to Ashland. Ashland's not that big. Why not just sign Huntington? A much better choice there. But this is Kentucky being provincial and insisting on signing one more Kentucky city when there's no reason to. Louisiana, well, these are all bad on this sign. Everything is bad here. And this is in the city of Slidell, which is signed everywhere and shouldn't be signed anywhere, so that's bad. But I gotta say, 10 East Bay St. Louis takes the cake for the worst of the worst, because Bay St. Louis is in Mississippi. Mississippi itself does not sign it on 10, only Louisiana does. And 10 doesn't really come that close to it. It's an old US 90 town. Signing Bay St. Louis over Mobile or Biloxi or anything like that is just ridiculous. And in Maine, this is where my size of the city does not really matter, because Maine's worst control city is also its biggest, Portland. The reason being, we've talked about this a lot, is because I-95 absolutely should not be signed for Portland here, because it is the longer and tolled way to get there, versus 295 is shorter, actually goes through downtown Portland, and it's free. So Portland should be on that 295 side, not the 95 side. This is an absolute land grab by the Maine Turnpike Association trying to get extra cash from you. Maryland has a lot of bad choices, but I'm going to say 70 West Hancock is the worst of the worst. Hancock is tiny. There is nothing there. And it's being signed because that's the junction with I-68. But I-68, from that junction, you could go in either direction to get to Pittsburgh. So there's no reason to not just sign 70 for Pittsburgh right here. Massachusetts, we had our fun with Waltham, but yeah, Waltham being signed on I-95, the most important road in the United States. Having Waltham on overhead signs all over the place is ridiculous. Waltham, I'm sure it's a fine place, but it is a suburb. It has no business on a road of this stature. In Michigan, signing 75 south for St. Ignace out of the gate right when we get to Michigan from Canada is pretty ridiculous too. I mean, sign the Mackinac Bridge or Saginaw or Detroit. I mean, Detroit would probably be the way I'd go. Minnesota, they sign Albert Lee everywhere. They love signing Albert Lee. They love it so much. It should never be signed anywhere. There's always something better to sign than Albert Lee. Mississippi, here's another one of those signs where every one of the choices is bad other than US 49 for Hattiesburg. But everything else here is terrible. I'm going to say Macomb is the biggest transgression on this sign. 55 South Macomb should absolutely be 55 South New Orleans. Jackson is not that far from New Orleans. There's no reason to sign small Mississippi towns on overhead signs with a major junction with an exo interstate at the most important junction in the whole state. And you get Macomb. Come on. Missouri and their insistence on Rolla is definitely a problem. Westbound Rolla all over the place on I-44. Why not just stay with Tulsa because that's what was set in St. Louis, or switch to Springfield, the third biggest city in the state? Rolla. We've got a Patreon going on patreon.com/Control City Freak, and you can make requests on some tiers and also support the channel directly. Really appreciate everybody who has signed up for that. You can also make exit requests for a $5 super thanks or super sticker, and we are going to be doing Washington 99. All right, let's take a look at Montana. Bismarck good, Sheridan bad. They get on to Wyoming's obsession with Sheridan and sign Sheridan a bunch. They should just be signing Rapid City here. Nebraska, there's not many overhead signs in Nebraska, and at the overhead junction with I-76, they do a good job. I'm going to say Sydney being the bottom line anywhere for any reason is a mistake. That is treating Sydney as the primary control city, and it should not be. Nevada does a pretty good job, really. Elko is their only questionable thing, and in a few years it might not even be questionable because Elko is growing. But for now, I would say signing Elko in Reno is not the way to go. They should just go straight for Salt Lake City. New Hampshire, going north out of the larger cities in the south, and we get Plymouth, Littleton. Well, those are both pretty bad. I would say Plymouth is probably the worst of the two. It is very small, and there's not really any reason to sign it. Probably better to just sign north for Vermont or St. Johnsbury or something, or for Canada, although we go through Vermont before Canada. In New Jersey makes a lot of really weird, questionable choices, a lot of really, really bad signage all over the place in New Jersey, but I gotta say their capital takes the cake. Trenton is an important city, and it's the capital of New Jersey, but it should not be signed on southbound I-95 or the Jersey Turnpike, because neither of those roads go to Trenton. Philadelphia, the fifth biggest city in the country, is an hour and a half away from here, and 95 does go to Philly. So Philly is what should be signed here, 100%. New Mexico, one of the famous worst signs in the entire system, signing 25 north for Las Vegas, especially when the real Las Vegas isn't that far away. This is ridiculous. It should absolutely not be that. It should be Colorado Springs, Denver, something, not Las Vegas. New York State, probably their biggest problem is Jamestown, but the overhead Jamestown signs are in Pennsylvania, and the other overhead Jamestown going westbound on I-86 have been changed, so that's not so much of a problem anymore. So I'm going to say the biggest New York transgression is New Jersey's biggest transgression. Signing Trenton. Why would they sign Trenton from New York City? Sign Newark! 95 and 1 actually go to Newark, and it's bigger. I mean, Newark would be fine, or if you're going to sign something further away, sign Philly. North Carolina, take your pick. I mean, every day it's going to be something different, but I'm going to say it's going to be 95 North Benson. And Northbound, this is Northbound. You could be signing, at this point, I'm going to say it should probably be Richmond or something. North Dakota does a pretty good job. Maybe their biggest problem is not having a control city on 94 at this point, but you do see a pull through control city, which is Minneapolis, on a earlier sign, so it's not that big of a deal here. Grand Forks is probably their most questionable control city because you could just go straight Winnipeg after Fargo, but Grand Forks is probably fine as well, so no big beef on this one. In Ohio, bet you thought I was going to go Marietta, but no. Ohio has worse than Marietta. The way that Ohio signs I-76 is just preposterous. The way they do this in the very end of that road, signing Barberton and Lodi instead of Columbus because we're going to be dumping into I-71. Oklahoma, I feel like I gave them a pass for this when I was doing the I-44 video originally. St. Louis can sign Tulsa. right? They can sign Tulsa from St. Louis, so they could sign St. Louis from Tulsa as well. St. Louis is the bigger city, bigger draw than Tulsa is, so why not sign St. Louis if St. Louis can sign Tulsa? Joplin is not that far away, it's just not that big. Springfield would be better instead of Joplin as well too, but yeah, just sign St. Louis. Oregon, this is possibly the worst sign in the entire United States for control cities. Every one of these control cities is a joke. None of them should be on there, not a one. Maybe is a secondary Hermiston, but there's other exits for Hermiston coming later. It's the biggest city in eastern Oregon, so I guess throw that up there. Umatilla, I'm going to say, is the worst. Signing that over the Tri-Cities is just insane. Signing that. It's 6,000 people, and a third of them are in the prison there. They somehow count the prison in their census there. Absolutely no way should that be signed there. Pennsylvania has another one where there's so many. I could do like a top 20 worst control cities in Pennsylvania, but I feel like 78 Easton is probably the worst because this is PA saying, we have like 5 miles left of PA, but we're going to still stick with signing PA. We're going to sign random small towns people only know for aluminum bats when we could sign New York City, which is right down the road, not very far away. But no, Easton, PA. Rhode Island does not have a lot of 2-digit interstates, just 95, and 95 is not in it for long, so it doesn't really have time to make many mistakes. This is really quite a caveat. This is an entrance ramp sign, and we do have New York on there too, so adding Westerly and New York is the biggest problem I could find in Rhode Island, and really, like I said, it's an interchange sign, it's not a pull-through, and we have the main control city there anyway, so really this isn't that bad. South Carolina does a pretty good job all around. I've had a lot of people talk about this in the comments. I do think Florence could be just thrown away. Florence is not that big of a city. We could just start signing Fayetteville beyond Columbia here. We don't really need to sign Florence. It's just got the intersection with I-20, but it's otherwise not that big of a town. South Dakota, well, if you sign Albert Lee, that's going to be your worst control city. Signing Albert Lee on overhead signs is really terrible, especially when it's not even your state. Tennessee, this is very nitpicky again because Tennessee does such a good job. I bet you probably thought I was going to say Bristol, but I've come to terms on Bristol. I think Bristol is fine. It represents the Tri-Cities. That's far eastern Tennessee. That makes sense. I would say the worst Tennessee has is signing 240 North Little Rock. They're signing that because it's going to intersect with 40 and 40 is going to Little Rock, but at this interchange with 55 and 240 and 69 is actually there too. I think 240 should be signed for downtown Memphis because we haven't gotten there yet. We're within city limits of Memphis, but we should sign downtown here. Texas has a bunch of weird signage. They get a little provincial, but I would say the worst transgression they have is signing Denton in Dallas and Fort Worth. Signing Denton on 35E and 35W North. Yeah, okay, everybody's like, okay, yeah, there's an interstate connection there, 35E and 35W. But I'm like, but nobody is going to drive up 35E and turn around and go back down 35W to go to Fort Worth. It's not the way it works. It's not a useful interchange. So signing Denton is ridiculous. Also, some people are like, oh, it's pretty big, for a suburb. Well, if that's the case, then why are we signing 30 West Fort Worth? Why aren't we signing Arlington, which is a huge suburb? Yeah, check and mate. There's no reason to be signing Denton. This should be Oklahoma City. Sign a different metro when you're talking about a 2-digit X5 interstate. You gotta sign a different metro. Utah does a pretty good job on all of their interstates. Probably their worst thing is just not giving 215 any kind of control city. 215 east, 215 west. Could put some control cities up there. Vermont, right when you cross the border on I-91 from Canada, we get 91 South Newport, which is like 8 miles down the road. Just a ridiculous place to sign. Sign somewhere further down and not Newport. Come on. Northbound 81 is a tricky one in Virginia. I honestly think from Roanoke, it should just be signed for Washington, D.C. until you get to I-66. But signing Lexington, especially when Kentucky's so near and Lexington, Virginia is like the 5th most famous Lexington, should not be on the overhead signs. It is quite confusing doing it this way. Washington, I know this is an interchange, but it's overhead, so I'm going to count it. Ritzville! Ritzville! Not Ritzville and Seattle, but just Ritzville. Come on, why would you sign Ritzville? West Virginia has a lot of terrible control cities. There's a lot to choose from, but I'm going to say Fairmont is the worst of the worst. In this case, you could still sign 79 South for other West Virginia cities and still be in-state provincial. There's no reason to sign a small town like this as an overhead. Wisconsin, I'm sure nobody's surprised. I would say Janesville is their worst control city. It's not that Janesville is a bad control city per se. It's just that it's only like 10 miles further away from where we're at in Beloit here. And because Madison is a much bigger draw, state capital, university, second biggest city, we should have Madison on this sign. And finally, Wyoming. We have got this sign that keeps getting worse and worse. This 8025 junction, Fort Collins, not good, should be Denver. 80 West Rock Springs is the most head-scratching choice here. I have no idea why they would pick Rock Springs. If you're gonna pick in-state, pick Laramie. This used to say Salt Lake City way back in the day, I think. But yeah, pick Laramie now, because Laramie is closer than Rock Springs, it's bigger than Rock Springs, it's a bigger draw than Rock Springs, has more important junctions than Rock Springs, and you got the University of Wyoming there. All right, well, that should wrap up our... Oh, wait. Huh? Oh, I missed a state? I forgot to have a state? Okay. Oh, yeah, Colorado. Yeah, Colorado. What would their worst... Oh, yeah. Yeah, Lyman. On every road! Why, Colorado? Why? All the Lyman. And hey, let's look at this one here. Let's look at this. I think this is a newer sign. We got 70 East signed at I-25. Denver and Aurora, because we haven't hit downtown Denver yet. And then Aurora, a big suburb. I mean, it's not great to have an EXO sign for a suburb, but it beats Lyman. I wonder if maybe this channel's making a difference, that we have something signed besides Lyman there. It's a little bit better. All right. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Control City Freak. This one was a lot of fun to do. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm sure some of you are annoyed at some of my choices. That's fine. Let me know why I'm wrong, but I'm not. I'm definitely right. Next week, we have a big one with US 301. Requests are closed for that by now, because by the time this is up, I will have already recorded that. But I will see you then, and until next time, my name is Todd, and keep on trucking.